Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have here with me Joanna Smith, who is the Chief Information Officer of the Royal Brompton and Harefield NHS Foundation Trust, who will be talking about her journey with Nexthink. Joanna, would you like to pick up?
Certainly. Thank you very much. Hi, folks. So just by way of some introduction and context for you all, the Royal Brompton and Harefield NHS Foundation Trust is the UK's largest centre for the treatment of adult congenital heart disease and the largest specialist heart and lung centre. This means we're a tertiary referral centre, and therefore we're quite a simple organisation. We're made up of two hospitals, one in Chelsea, one in near Hillingdon in Harefield, and also a private outpatients facility in Wimpole Street. From my point of view, I've had 30 years experience in pharmaceuticals, predominantly in IT, including global and local roles. And this role that I've been in now for the last 5 years has been my first time in a public sector in an NHS hospital. I'm a wife and mother, and I've got 2 dogs, 4 cats and a koi pond, so you might say that I'm fairly used to chaos. I also have responsibility at the Trust for all our digital services and operations, including imaging IT, information governance, clinical engineering and medical records. So just a little bit of context about what I inherited back in January 13. It was very much an organisation that had quite a siloed culture within the what was information services department. Folks were very hard-working, very well-intentioned, but they really focused on the technology, not the user experience and meaningful outcomes. We had quite a lot of gaps in our skills and capabilities, and perhaps most significantly, there was poor engagement with clinical and operational colleagues, meaning that really IT kind of did what it thought was the right thing, and the business kind of went off and did what they wanted to do regardless. There was no clear strategy and plan. We had all sorts of issues around the desktop, the network, management of capacity. We were, of course, in those days back on XP with a very aging estate, both in terms of the desktop and physically. And the little piece of artwork on the bottom right, I really like this picture. It's actually a truthful representation back in 2013 of all of the different systems and how they connected up. So you might imagine the challenge that meant when we were trying to make changes to something. In the same way, the challenges when desktop folks went out to try to provide support to people, they really didn't know what they were going to encounter. So from my point of view, the first thing I had to do, I'm a great believer in setting clearly what our purpose is. And our purpose here is very much to enable the Trust to achieve its goals through the effective use of digital and technology solutions. And that means delivering great care to our patients. That's why we're here. We're not here specifically to spend lots of money and time playing with great tech, unless that is really clearly aligned to the goals and objectives of the organisation, which are all about delivering great service to highly complex patients. Patients who've been referred to us by other hospitals because their comorbidities, their conditions are more challenging than your average DGH can cope with. So we put in place a number of strategic principles, and you're able to see these. I don't plan to read through all of those. And we also put in place a major transformation programme, which was essentially about getting all of the basics right first. You can't begin a clinical transformation and look at how you're going to change service to patients if you've got an unreliable network infrastructure, if you've got aging desktop PCs that don't work and can't be managed well. So we had to do a fair amount of work to put that in place, and that was approved by our board in March of 14. So our journey with Nexthink really began in 14. From my point of view, as I've already mentioned, I knew that we'd got a poorly managed estate. We didn't seem to have a particularly clear vision for how we were managing our assets and how we were going to standardise support and make that an easy, repeatable process. So I wanted to understand what I'd inherited and how we were managing that. And I'd started to establish a network of colleagues across the NHS, and I'd talked to some folks in another large London teaching hospital, and they told me about the Nexthink product. And they were incredibly enthusiastic, and they came over and they demonstrated their installation of Nexthink and how they were using it, and they showed us some of their dashboards. And from my point of view, that was something, my immediate reaction was, I want that, and I want that now. So we then had some conversations with Nexthink, and they came along and they did a short engagement initially where they installed their product, ran it across the entire estate of all of our networked attached PCs, and they produced a report showing us kind of what the state of the nation was. And I have to say, sadly, that was, you know, a very eye-opening experience. And the little graphic on the sort of right-hand side, the main part of your screen there, is a genuine snapshot of a slide that I put together and I continue to use today in various formats and guises. And again, I won't read through all of that for you, but this slide was used very much to help us then make the individual cases for each of those parts of that 3-year roadmap. It was an extremely powerful way of presenting data and fact to people. And if we just call out some of those things, the main number in the middle, I use that shamelessly, and I understand that for anyone who's mathematically oriented, that of course, if you multiply any set of numbers by the number of PCs you have, you're going to get a very large number. But only, of course, if your desktop isn't standard. If every PC has the same basic installation, you don't need to multiply by the number of PCs. So using the Nexthink information, I was able to sadly identify that we had 7 different operating systems, we had 17 different database engines, as I've mentioned, over 400 applications, 5 different standard browsers, and please note 62 different versions of Internet Explorer, and around 3,000 desktops. That multiplies out at a little under 750 million combinations that a desktop engineer could be faced with when going desk side to help support a user with a problem. And that has been a key statement that I've used repeatedly when trying to drive through the message of how important it is to standardize support, to remove the ability of the user to install things themselves. You'll notice there 1/3 of our PCs or more had admin privileges at the time. We were also able to see that over 30%, 1/3 of our PCs were having issues every single day. And over 500 PCs had multiple instances of suspicious or high-risk activity. So the Nexthink tool provided all of the metrics that you see on this slide, I think almost without exception, other than perhaps the 400 disparate systems, beautiful piece of artwork. And that's been a very compelling set of information that I've depended on regularly when trying to make the case. So in terms of how the journey actually went, well, we had great enthusiasm initially from the team. However, this did diminish over time, and I suspect this wasn't helped too much by changes in management. I was really trying to drive through a different ethos in terms of service delivery, and this meant wanting to introduce best practice, ITIL, these sorts of things, a standardized desktop, and I did have a number of changes in management in that area. Of course, we'd also by now made great progress with migrating off of XP to Windows 7, and that project included the creation of the standard gold build. And so I think there was certainly a belief, I certainly understood, that that Windows 7 migration had essentially addressed all of those issues on that previous slide, because it meant that I now had the standard build. However, over the next couple of years, I'm afraid that the team made less use of the tool. I was being reassured that we had got a standard build and all was good, and so the team effectively stopped using Nexthink. In late 16 and throughout 17, however, I was getting more and more anxious because I became more and more aware of issues and complaints that suggested to me the desktop was not a standard desktop and was not being consistently managed. And with my deputy and I, we started to push harder and harder for metrics. And of course, the other interesting thing was the wonderful desktop view that I had real time into a dashboard that showed me through Nexthink precisely what was going on my estate. I could drill through myself and see how many PCs I'd got, what makes and models they were, what their specifications were, all of those vital pieces of information that helps me at an exec level have confidence that things are under control. I'd ceased to get access to that. That had disappeared some months previously, and the promises that I'd been given from the introduction of SCCM and SCOM as part of the Windows 7 project didn't materialise in terms of any management information from my perspective. So not only was I getting a little bit anxious, but I was blind, which increased that anxiety. So with my deputy and I, around about late 17, we decided that we needed to bring back Nexthink. Now, I'd say at this stage that my deputy previously hadn't got any experience of Nexthink. She hadn't been in place at the time we were really using it. So she had to have a little bit of a leap of faith from my perspective in terms of what I was telling her. But I persuaded her that this was the right thing to do, that her team wasn't able to provide us the information that we needed. And so we talked to Nexthink again, and we had the solution reintroduced around the end of 17 into early 18. And over the last couple of months, we've started to get access to, again, that rich report that shows us what's going on. I have a real-time CIO dashboard that I can dip into at any time, as can she. And I'm disappointed to have to say that our fears were confirmed. We had somewhat lost control of our desktop. Perhaps rather lazy or shoddy behaviours meant that we'd gone back to a habit of perhaps leaving people with local administrator passwords. This, of course, again, had resulted in there being a set of different versions of software and installations of things that there shouldn't have been. So in terms of the learning so far, from my point of view, the Nexthink tool is unique in my experience in terms of providing actionable information in real time with no effort from my point of view and no effort from my team. Once plugged in, once set up, and you've defined the things you particularly want to see, it's just there all the time, quietly monitoring across the network every device that is attached now and has attached over the preceding months. It provides me that deep insight into the state of the desktop and, more importantly, the user experience. We can see for real that users are experiencing crashes, very poor performance, and over time, of course, this means that you can spot and prevent problems before they really impact the user. It does need to be used every day by the service desk, because if they see this as a one-stop task of putting problems right and then kind of assuming that you're back in control, you go back to being blind, you go back to running the risk of poor behaviours, poor practices creeping back in again. But don't underestimate the impact of a change in ways of working on some folks' attitudes and behaviours. A lot of folks in my organisation, as I say, are very hardworking, very committed, but they do believe they know the best way of doing things. And it's not necessarily a proactive, preventative attitude. It's very much more about being the hero once a problem arises. And of course, what we don't want is the problem to arise. We want to prevent it before it occurs, because if it arises, it's already causing disruption and problem, and you don't want that in a hospital. So you may need to acquire some new skills and capabilities. But my view is you must trust your instincts. If you think there's an issue out there, there almost certainly is. And so lastly, some thoughts in terms of recommendations. Identify an advocate in your service desk team, or perhaps somewhere else in your organisation if you have business relationship managers or service level managers, those sorts of roles. Find someone who really understands the importance and value of this and can see how it's going to help them deliver a great service to the end users that they engage with. Make sure that they're exposed to some understandings of best practices. Help them realise that by giving management great evidence and facts about the state of the desktop, that enables us to fight the case for more investment. The more evidence we have, the more accurate it is, the easier it is for us to make cases for different investments. Aim to embed the use of Nexthink into IT business as usual from the outset. Talk to Nexthink users, get them to show you examples of what it tells them and how that helps. I'd be very happy to talk to anyone about my experience of it, and I'm sure my team would be happy to demonstrate it to folks. Persuade Nexthink, if you need to persuade them, to run a short free of charge pilot to review your estate. Get them to show you for real what's happening. You'll probably be surprised. Thank you. Any questions?
So we've got one question, and keep in mind that we're running out of time. So if you do have any more questions, please do email us, and we'll aim to have them answered for you. But one of the ones that we had was, you mentioned it's massively valuable for service desk team members to improve the quality of service you deliver. So in terms of reducing the triage time and ticket volume, solve more problems at L1 or even before they happen. But what about you personally as a CIO? Do you have some kind of daily report of dashboard that you refer to?
So absolutely. So from my point of view and my deputy, and just to be clear, my deputy is essentially the IT director because, as I've mentioned, I've got other responsibilities. So she is responsible for all routine aspects of daily IT service. She and I now have a CIO dashboard, and we look at that every day. And as I mentioned, that's in real time. So we are able to absolutely see what is happening for real, make sure that our teams are checking on this information, and we're able to speak with confidence and hard data at our fingertips when we're engaging with execs, when we're engaging with colleagues, because sometimes also people, of course, tell you something that perhaps isn't entirely the case in order to try and get what they want. And it's also great to be able to go back and say, yeah, you know, that's really interesting. We can't see any evidence of you having had your PC crash multiple times yesterday. So it's not always about the fact that our estate isn't in a good state. It's also about our ability to prove that it is in a great state and that we can demonstrate great positive progress, for example, in reduced time to start up, fewer instances of problems. That's all really positive information to feed back to maintain your credibility that the investments the organisation's made in you are worthwhile.
Joanna, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all the attendees for participating in this webinar, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.